ChatGPT, Gemini, and DeepSeek all claim to be the best AI assistant you can use right now. So I pulled every pricing sheet, every benchmark leaderboard, and every API doc I could find to settle it. The biggest surprise? The model marketed as 500 times cheaper isn't actually 500 times cheaper once you look at the real published rate. And that gap matters more than any benchmark score in this whole comparison. Let's start with the number that decides whether this is a hobby expense or a real line item on your budget. ChatGPT Plus runs $20 a month. Google's AI Pro tier is $19.99. DeepSeek's app is completely free. On subscription price alone, that's already a clear win for DeepSeek, though it's close enough between ChatGPT and Gemini that it barely matters at the consumer level. The real separation shows up once you look at API pricing, the rate developers actually pay to run these models at scale. ChatGPT charges $5 per million input tokens and $30 per million output tokens. Gemini's input pricing splits into a 10-cent and $4 tier, depending on the model, with no published output figure I could confirm. DeepSeek's standard rate is 14 cents per million input tokens and 28 cents per million output tokens. Do the math on that output number, and it's not close. $30 against 28 cents means DeepSeek is running over 100 times cheaper than ChatGPT for the exact same volume of generated text. Scale that up, run 10 million output tokens a month, and DeepSeek's bill lands around $2.80. The same job on ChatGPT's API costs roughly $300. DeepSeek wins cost, clearly, and it isn't particularly close. That's not a rounding error, that's the difference between a side project and a real monthly expense. I went through the official pricing pages, the API documentation, and the independent benchmark leaderboards for all three of these. No vendor money, no cherry picking, just the numbers each company will actually stand behind. Cost only matters if the cheap option can actually do the work, so here's where we test that. On SWE Bench Verified, which grades models against real GitHub issues instead of toy problems, ChatGPT's current flagship, GPT 5.6, Soul, scores 88.7%. One of the biggest problems I run into when using AI agents is turning their output into YouTube content I can actually use to market my product. That's why this video is sponsored by Subscriber, a tool that helps business owners connect their AI agents to YouTube and market their products without spending 10 hours every week creating content. You can connect Claude or ChatGPT directly to Subscriber. It then analyzes your business, website, and YouTube channel to help you create SEO-optimized video ideas, scripts, thumbnails, and even complete videos that actually match your brand. What I like most is that every week, Subscriber gives me a list of high-potential video ideas I can immediately execute, and it can even help edit videos for me, with or without my face, including videos like the one you're watching right now. It's easy to get started, and you can try Subscriber for free using the link in the description below. Now back to the video. Gemini 3.1 Pro and DeepSeek's V4 Pro Max both land at 80.6%. Here's the twist worth flagging though. On the previous generation of these models, DeepSeek's V4 Pro scored 91.2% on that same benchmark, beating GPT-5's 74.9% and Gemini 3 Pro's 71.8% outright. So the story isn't that DeepSeek can't code at a high level, it clearly can. It's that ChatGPT's newest flagship jumped ahead of everyone on the latest generation, while DeepSeek and Gemini are still tied at the current tier. On the simpler Human Evil and MBPP tests, Gemini edges ahead of DeepSeek 97.8% to 96.4% on Human Evil and 94.2% to 91.1% on MBPP. Those gaps are small enough that most working developers wouldn't notice the difference day to day. But on the benchmark that actually simulates messy, real-world software work, ChatGPT's current flagship is the one with the clearest lead. This round goes to ChatGPT. That's an 8.1-point lead for ChatGPT on the exact benchmark most developers actually check first. Coding ability doesn't matter much if you're sitting there waiting for the response. So let's talk about how fast these things actually feel to use. Time to first token is the number that determines how responsive a model feels in conversation. ChatGPT's GPT 5.1 answers in 1.8 seconds. Gemini 3 Pro takes 2.4 seconds. DeepSeek's V3 measured close to 1.02 seconds, though that number came from a different testing setup, so treat it as directional rather than a clean head-to-head. Where the story flips is raw output speed, how fast the model actually generates text once it starts talking. Gemini's flagship pushes out somewhere between 132.8 and 140.6 tokens per second. ChatGPT's GPT-5 sits around 94.9 to 100 tokens per second. DeepSeek's V4 Pro runs about 90 tokens per second, respectable, but not class-leading. And if you look at Gemini's fastest model, specifically 3.7 Flash, it hits roughly 340 tokens per second, nearly 3 times faster than its closest competitor. So here's the honest split. ChatGPT feels the most responsive because it starts talking first. Gemini finishes the job fastest once it gets going. DeepSeek sits comfortably in the middle on both measures, never the fastest, never the slowest. If you're chaining multiple calls together in an automated workflow, Gemini's raw throughput adds up. If you're having a real-time conversation, ChatGPT's quicker start is the one you'll actually feel. Stick with me because the last 4 tests are where this decision actually flips. Now let's talk about how much information these models can actually hold and hand back to you in one go, because this is where long documents and big code bases either work smoothly or turn into a stitching exercise. ChatGPT's GPT-5 caps out at a 400,000 token context window. Gemini 3 Pro and DeepSeek's V4 Pro both handle a full million tokens, more than double ChatGPT's ceiling. ChatGPT caps its responses at 128,000 tokens. Gemini caps out even lower, at 65,536 tokens. DeepSeek's max output sits at 384,000 tokens, nearly 3 times what ChatGPT can hand back in a single response, and close to 6 times Gemini's ceiling. Translate that into a real task. If you're asking one of these models to generate a full report, rewrite a large file, or produce a long piece of documentation in one pass, DeepSeek is the only one of the 3 that won't force you to break the job into pieces. For anyone doing serious long document work, that output ceiling is the deciding factor, and DeepSeek wins this round clean. But context in isn't the whole story. Output back out is where DeepSeek pulls ahead outright. That's a genuine tie between Gemini and DeepSeek on raw context size, and a real gap for anyone feeding these models entire codebases, long research documents, or huge transcripts in a single request. Last test. What can these models actually see, hear, and generate beyond plain text, and where can you actually run them? Gemini is the most multimodal of the 3, handling text, images, audio, video, and even live video natively. ChatGPT covers text, images, voice, and video too, close behind but not quite as broad. DeepSeek, by comparison, is text only, no image input, no image generation, no audio, no video. That gap matters if your workflow involves anything visual or spoken. Gemini's deep integration with Google Workspace, Search, and Android also makes it the obvious default if you're already living inside that ecosystem. ChatGPT ties into the Microsoft ecosystem in a similar way. DeepSeek makes up for its narrower modality with something neither competitor offers: open weights under an MIT license. That means you can self-host it, run it on your own infrastructure, and avoid per-token costs entirely if you have the hardware to support it. ChatGPT and Gemini are both closed systems, API access only, no self-hosting option at all. Gemini takes this round on breadth. DeepSeek takes it on flexibility. For privacy-sensitive teams or anyone trying to eliminate ongoing API costs, that's a real structural advantage, even though it comes at the cost of image and audio support. ChatGPT leads on the benchmark most developers check first, 88.7% on SWE Bench verified, and it answers fastest at 1.8 seconds to first token, which makes it feel the most responsive assistant of the 3. Gemini is the multimodal all-rounder, native audio, video, and live video support, the fastest raw output speed at up to 340 tokens per second on its quickest model, and the deepest Google ecosystem integration. DeepSeek is the value and flexibility play, over 100 times cheaper than ChatGPT on API output cost, a matching million token context window, the largest output cap of the 3 at 384,000 tokens, and open weights you can self-host. Now, ChatGPT leads on the benchmark most developers check first, 88.7% on SWE Bench verified, and it answers fastest at 1.8 seconds to first token, which makes it feel the most responsive assistant of the 3. Gemini is the multimodal all-rounder, native audio, video, and live video support, the fastest raw output speed at up to 340 tokens per second on its quickest model, and the deepest Google ecosystem integration. DeepSeek is the value and flexibility play, over 100 times cheaper than ChatGPT on API output cost, a matching million token context window, the largest output cap of the three at 384,000 tokens, and open weights you can self-host. ChatGPT leads on the benchmark most developers check first, 88.7% on SWE Bench verified, and it answers fastest at 1.8 seconds to first token, which makes it feel the most responsive assistant of the three. Gemini is the multimodal all-rounder, native audio, video, and live video support. The fastest raw output speed at up to 340 tokens per second on its quickest model, and the deepest Google ecosystem integration. DeepSeek is the value and flexibility play, over 100 times cheaper than ChatGPT on API output cost, a matching million token context window, the largest output cap of the three at 384,000 tokens, and open weights you can self-host. For most people, ChatGPT is the default pick. It leads on the coding benchmark that matters most for real development work. It's the fastest to start responding. And plus, at $20 a month is solid value for what you get. If you're cost sensitive or regularly working with huge documents, DeepSeek is the smarter technical choice. Comparable coding performance to Gemini at a fraction of the price. With the biggest output ceiling of the three, Gemini earns its spot as the best all-rounder for multimodal work, but its higher cost for top-tier features keeps it from being the universal recommendation. The winner really comes down to one trade-off: how much you value raw coding performance against cost and flexibility. Here's what the marketing won't tell you. DeepSeek's advertised 500 times cheaper than Gemini claim doesn't hold up against the actual published rate card. The real number is DeepSeek's cash hit input pricing at 0.028 per million tokens against a 150 figure for G. If this helped, the next breakdown on the channel goes even deeper.